Hello, we're on episode 2 of the Q&A, going through 2 questions today, off a bit of feedback off everyone. I think if we go through topics on individual videos a little bit more, and then I can go through things that way. But question number 1, this is a question that I have quite often, or it's a problem that is presented to me quite often, so I think this is going to be a good one to go through. It's a question of Sam. Sam is struggling with his deadlift and RDLs, things like that. So basically he's struggling with his hinge. He says his hamstrings feel ridiculously tight and his lower back always aches the next day or even during, and he just doesn't feel strong or safe doing the movement. If I had a quid for every time someone couldn't hinge, I'd be rich. I'd be so rich. It seems to be a movement that people really struggle with, and I think it's just because outside of the gym, it's not really a movement that we think about doing too much. If you ever bend down to pick something up like washing or tying your shoe, it's very rare that you're going to hinge. You'll just bend over and get there. Problem is, if you've got a big heavy weight in your hands, if you bend over at your spine rather than hinging at the hips, you're asking muscles that aren't really designed to really pick stuff up, compared to if we hinge, we get the glutes, your hamstrings, these big powerful muscles helping us out. So let's dive into that a bit. Understanding hinging, first of all, what we're after. I have my lovely diagrams here, ignore the foot. So if you look at your rib cage and your pelvis, okay, you can't see that well on there. Let me shift you in a little bit. There we go. So we've got rib cage and pelvis, and then you've got these dotted lines that just show that means your rib cage and your pelvis are parallel to each other. So if we're stood up, we kind of want that. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but you understand the principle. When we hinge, we want that to carry on. We just want the rib cage and the pelvis to both tip, which then means that your lower back's in a really strong position, your hamstrings and glutes go on tension, and you're in the best position to move that weight. A problem a lot of people have, if you look over here, is their pelvis doesn't actually tip as much as what the rib cage does. And then if I just move you in a bit again, you see how these lines end up crossing over rather than being parallel. And what that means is your lower back is getting stretched out. Whichever muscle is being stretched the most is being recruited the most. So you're asking your lower back to do a huge amount of work there. It's much better at doing the work when it gets to hold position in this parallel compared to if it's stretched out. Okay, so step 1, understanding that. Hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory. So then the next question is, how do we achieve that? How do we make sure we're hinging at the hip and not bending at the spine? One of the things I get people to do quite early on is, if you was to stand in place and lift one leg up, and you get a crease in your hip, don't you? So I'm lifting my knee here, you can't quite see it, but you get a crease in your hip. If you put your finger right in that crease and then put your foot back down, when you hinge over, you should feel the bony bit of your pelvis, and that should completely trap your finger against your thigh. So let me spin you, and I will make sure I don't fall over. And I go over here, you can see me just about. So if I do that, I can find that little pivot. When I hinge, dink, I've trapped my finger in there now, so that bony bit is right against my thigh, okay? And you see I'm pretty much stacked on top. So pelvis and rib cage move together. If I leave my pelvis here, so the top of my pelvis is facing up, and I move my rib cage, not the same. And the problem is a lot of people are actually hinging to begin with, and then they move the rib cage rather than carry on with the whole thing. So most people can hinge to about their knees really quite well, and then they do this rather than that. It's quite a subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference to what's actually doing the work. So that would be your challenge. If you were going to set up on a deadlift, for example, shift it that way a bit. I usually say to people, get your fingers in those hips and try and hinge as far as you can, try and pinch, then relax your arms and see how close you are to the bar. If you can grab the bar, great. If you can't, just reach around a little bit, bend your knees slightly till you can reach it. And then from that position, pardon me, then you can worry about trying to push your head backwards and pushing your feet into the floor, and you'll stand up. And it should be hamstrings and glutes that are predominantly helping you stand up, and you won't be lifting with your back. Your back will just be on to keep yourself straight. That makes sense. I hope that helps, Sam. That's where I would go to first, is learning how to do all that and figuring all that out. If you're unsure, start in the rack. You know, if your gym has a rack, or if it doesn't, just raise the bar up on something, just so that you're going, let's say knee height, and you're going all hinge first, and you get used to that motion. Get used to trying to drive your head back and push your feet down to stand back up. A lot of people are surprised with how little it feels like they're moving. So a lot of times people hinge, they get to about knee height and they go, my hamstrings are on fire. And that's it, that's perfect. The reason you can't go further yet is because your brain doesn't trust your hamstrings. All of strength really is you don't build strength as much as your brain grants it, if that makes sense. It's that whole principle of, you know, when people can lift cars, you know, like a granny lifts a car off a kid, because it's the adrenaline rush and the nervous system says, yeah, let's do it. It's a similar principle. When you get into that full hinge and your hamstrings feel super tight, that's your brain saying, I don't want us to go much further, I'm not sure we can cope with it right now. Every time you let that rib cage go down as a consequence to try and go further, even though it's the right intention, you're trying to work better and get the full range of motion, you're actually damaging your hinge pattern and holding yourself back. So my advice is go to where you can, get those hamstrings to feel nice and tight, work on coming up in the right way, you know, don't overextend or anything like that, and then load it up a bit. Over time, matter of weeks it should be, you should feel like you can go a little bit further. You might not even be aware that you're going a little bit further. That's absolutely fine. A full hinge, for most people, you're looking at this line on your wrist going below your patellar tendon. Yeah, so your patellar tendon's on your knee. I've not got a thing. That's it, because that's when the bones of your pelvis and your legs will be completely hinged together. You won't be able to go any further. That's why if you're going to deadlift and you're quite tall, or you've got long legs and arms like me, you're going to have to just bend into it slightly so you can actually reach the bar. That makes sense? So yeah, don't try and go too far. Hinge as far as you can while maintaining all the right positions and good form. Maybe hold that for a couple of seconds, really own that position, then come back out. Over the next few weeks, load it up a little bit, take your time building it up, and you'll be able to go a little bit further in time. Hope that helps. If you're unsure, Sam, or you want any extra help, by all means send me a video, or get in touch and we can talk about some other little drills that might help you if you're struggling to feel it with that. But I've got quite a lot of confidence that that'll make a big difference for you. Cool. Question number 2, we're going to go for another video.